Hi, I'm Sister Francine Quillin, Sister of the Presentation, and I was asked to talk today about my experience of being trained in Rome to be a canon lawyer, and particularly of being the only woman in the class. When I became interested in the possibility of studying canon law, I talked with Father Dave Hines, a Dominican priest who was a canon lawyer and who had taught us theology. And he encouraged me, but he also suggested that I study in Rome because I would get a better picture of the universal church, and also because the professors at the university there were priests who had worked on the revision of canon law for the Second Vatican Council. Father also told me that the university, the Dominican University, was making a change in that now all their courses would be taught in English because of the diversity of population there. So, with the permission of the community, I headed to Rome, and I went early so that I could study the Italian language there because I would be immersed in that for the next 2 years. A Centennial Dominican whom I had contacted before leaving told me of a group of sisters from New York who had a convent there in which they had sisters who were students staying with them. And so fortunately, they had a room for me. Somehow this was all too easy. On the first day of Canon Law classes, I went into the Angelicum and I walked into a classroom to face a sea of Roman collars. And what looked like the only empty seat in the room was in the middle of the second row. So I took it and settled in. At the first break for the class, I felt a tap on my shoulder, and I turned around to meet Father Joe Dauer, who was a priest from the Archdiocese of Dubuque. The Archbishop had told me he would be there studying canon law, but I didn't know him. It wasn't hard for him to pick me out in this group of people. I learned that the classes that were to be taught in English were only in theology. So the Canon Law classes remained in Italian. So it felt pretty good at the end of a long day to go home to a community of American sisters and the comfort of speaking English with them, but not for long. On the third day, Father Mark Said, who was the head of the Canon Law department, came to me and said, "You will never learn Italian as long as you stay with American sisters." So we got on the bus and he took me to the south of the city where there was a group of sisters from Sicily who were friends of his, and they agreed to take me in, although they were not overly fond of American sisters. And there was this added problem that Sicily, of course, has its own dialect, so I was already mixing up a couple of things. And there wasn't a word of English spoken there. They didn't really understand English. In the long run, of course, I was really grateful, and that was probably my salvation because it was a huge adjustment, but it was a wonderful advantage for me. I was also blessed that Father Joe and the American priests whom he had met there took me in, and that was especially true because there was only one other sister in the class, one other woman in the class, and she was from Spain, so that didn't really help me. But the priests included me in lots of things. We would go to dinner together, we would study together, we would share news from home, and so that was very helpful to me. The 2 years remained a challenge, but there were a lot of wonderful things that happened. Rome itself was full of interesting places to see. The people were friendly and welcoming and very patient with my struggling Italian. There were several opportunities to be with the Holy Father in audiences and other kinds of gatherings, and if you worked it right, you could really get pretty close. I was also able to see other parts of Italy with some of the famous landmarks that we hear about. I am most grateful for the opportunity to have had those experiences and then later to serve as a canon lawyer for the Archdiocese, for our own community, for other communities of sisters, and for priests. One of my most memorable moments came with a letter from a woman who had been civilly married, divorced, and then civilly remarried. And she applied to the tribunal for a decree of invalidity, and I worked her case. And when I sent her notice of an affirmative decision, that is, that she was free to practice her faith and receive the sacraments in the Catholic Church, she wrote me a note, and she said, "You have no idea what it's like to sit in the pew Sunday after Sunday while everybody else goes up to communion." And so she was most grateful that her situation had been resolved. Being in Rome was a wonderful opportunity, but it has also benefited many other people over the years. I am grateful to have been able to serve them, and in the ways that this experience for me provided wonderful help in several circumstances for other people. So I'm grateful to the community particularly, and to all those who supported me while I was there.